Hey everyone, so I've had many of y'all ask how I made my Chaos Heart replica. The one you see here is from my Super Paper Mario cosplay performance in San Japan and earlier this year from Weebcon. So I'll show you how I made it and how you can make one of these minis for yourself. I rate this a 3 out of 5 difficulty crafting project. You will need some polycarbonate or other clear plastic sheeting. We also want some vinyl tinting. That's how we're going to create the outside. High viscosity, fast curing resin. We're going to add some mica or liquid resin pigments. You may also need sharp blades, an X-Acto knife, or a box cutter, cutting mat and ruler, some clear contact cement, some packing tape, a Dremel, and a heat gun. And of course, you're going to need the templates. I have these available on my website. You can get the nets for the large and small hearts, as well as the design for the back. Okay, so I know y'all are super curious as to how I got this scene into Blender. Now, I can't show you how I did this, and I can't share these objects either, but I will show you a technique to make your own 3D model. Okay, so I'm going to use a pretty common 3D modeling technique. I've got 2 screenshots, one that has the heart facing the front and one with the heart facing the side. Now, I'm not here to teach you how to use Blender, but this is the overall process to create these kinds of things when you don't have access to a game's files. So I'm using the orthographic views to get a flat view and set up the photos on their respective axes. Now that I've got the images set up, I can add a plane, set the origin to the center, add a mirror modifier, and begin extruding vertices. I'm using the edge to find out where I should put the vertex, and just tracing around the whole thing. Once I've filled in all the faces, I start to subdivide. I know the shell part of the heart doesn't actually start at the edge, but starts around here. Since this part will eventually become the shell of the heart, I need to make sure it has enough detail. Looking at the side, it looks almost like there's about 4 steps, which means I need to add 3 more edges. So I'm just using a knife tool to cut around the edge of the texture. Once I think it looks fine, I turn it to the side and begin moving the edges out like this. And this is the result. Now we have something that has a bit more depth. I'll go to the sculpting section and smooth it out. And this is what we have. Now to make the small hearts, I'm just going to duplicate this. And to save me a lot of trouble later down the line, I'm going to simplify the whole thing. So I'm removing every other edge and just filling in the faces. I also need to add this thing in the back, so I just extrude the edges inwards. And now all the models are done. We have the back, the large shell, and then the small ones. So now it's time to paperize them. So in order to turn these digital objects into something we can print and fold, we first need to have the paper plugin installed. We also need to mark the seams. I chose to mark them like this so that they are less visible. And of course I have to put one down the middle. Do the same for the small heart. Now I select everything, triangulate faces, and export the paper model. Set it to 1:1 scale, letter size, and turn off tabs and numbers. Now they are ready to print. Okay, so if you purchase the templates from my website, you want to print them on 8.5 by 11 printer paper, and the design parts on some sort of thick white cardstock. You don't have to use cardstock, any paper works fine. I use printer paper, but I use cardstock for the original one. For now, I'm going to set these to the side and we're just going to work on making the net. So we're going to start with the small hearts first. Now, if you want to save yourself a lot of time, since we are already using resin, if you have any of these sheets that have the little hearts in them, you can use that and just pour your resin in there and it will look just as fine. So I glue the small net pieces to some cardstock, wait for them to dry, cut and score them, and add some packing tape to the top. Now here I clearly forgot to score it before I put the packing tape on top. so don't make the same mistake that I did. But once you do that, you cut away the tape on the flaps and you glue everything together. This doesn't really need to be perfect. The plastic will sort of smooth out everything. So I tape the paper bust down to a stand of sorts and apply a petroleum jelly to the surface. And this helps get the paper out once the plastic cools and prevents our tools from sticking to it as well. I begin by melting the plastic on top of the paper heart and use some tweezers to push in the crest. I blast it with some more heat. Once the plastic covers every edge of the paper, run it under some cold water. You can just pop it in the freezer if you don't want to get it wet. And I take it out, cut out the excess plastic. I'm leaving the paper in there because we're going to use some resin. And depending on what kind of resin you use, sometimes they can get very hot, and we don't want the plastic to deform from the heat. Also, now is a good time to paint the plastic black so you don't have to put multiple coats of resin later. Mix up your high viscosity, fast curing resin, not the UV type, and add your pigments. Now for the rest of these small hearts, I have two sizes, a medium one and a sort of small one. These aren't quite the shape that I want, so what I'm going to do is sand them down. I just use the sandpaper bit on the Dremel and shape it to be a little bit more stout. Once I've got it there, I'll clean it up with increasingly finer grits of sandpaper. I'll polish it up a bit, and finally I'll apply a coat of UV resin. Now it's okay to use it on here since the UV resin itself is clear. I just put it under a UV light and it hardens within minutes. I clean up the bottom, no one's gonna see that. Now these are all ready to go. If you were to print these out on your own or to take it to a print shop, the backings part should be dark enough to where you can see it through the vinyl. Now, I printed out mine on my own home printer and I'm running out of ink, so I'll just have to make do with this. I'm going to darken everything by using some charcoal. So I blend it together and make sure it gets into the edges, because you will see that. The next step is to cut this general shape out, and we're going to glue it onto some black cardstock. Now, before we work on the other side, I'm going to cut out the large heart from the blank templates and work on the plastic sheeting. I'm just going to lay it on the plastic sheeting, trace around it, and then use the score marks to crease and remove it from the rest. Now I'm going to use some clear contact cement to trace around the design on the cardstock. And once I like where it is, I'm going to set a weight on top. Now, I didn't film this, but once it's cured, I just cut around the edge and removed as much of the black cardstock as I could. And now we're going to repeat the whole process on the other side. So you're going to cut out your design, glue it on, cut out the perimeter, and then you're going to add another plastic sheet on top. Alright, so now the part you've all been waiting for. We're going to start working on the outer part of the heart. So before making the larger shell, you will need to choose the right kind of plastic. I've said before, I use polycarbonate. I don't have a whole lot of this left, and I really don't know where else you can get this kind of stuff. This is why I'm making the heart a lot smaller, but if you choose to use any sort of plastic for your heart, you want something that is solid, won't melt, and is, of course, clear. Also, if y'all manage to find something similar to this stuff that comes in rolls, please let everyone else know in the comments, and it will be helpful for my crafting projects in the future as well. Anyways, we have our nets here. You're just going to cut around the edge, and it doesn't really need to be perfect because we're going to cut away this paper, so the edges don't need to be clean yet. So once we got the general shape cut out, we're going to apply it to our clear sheeting. I just tape it on there, make sure it's flush with the surface, and I begin to score the net by cutting away the paper from the plastic. Now remember, we are just scoring this. We're not cutting all the way through. Even if we score it, it does have the risk to snap and we'll use that later to break it away from the rest of the sheeting, but we don't want to go too deep. If you accidentally cut all the way through, it'll be fine. We use the vinyl to cover the whole thing and keep it together, so that's what it's for. Just be sure to be careful when you're scoring. We don't want to have too many of these. Okay, so once you've got a spiderweb looking thing like this, you can use your scissors or blade to cut them out, or you can pinch them like I'm doing to release it from the rest of the plastic. Be careful when you're doing this, you don't want to tear the whole thing apart. Once you've got both of these, you're going to make another set. So one of these gets one side, and then you need to make another set for the other side. Now it's time to apply the vinyl. We're going to clean the surface of the plastic, make sure there's no dust or other bits that can get stuck under there, and we're going to carefully peel the paper away from the vinyl. We're going to take the plastic and we're going to put it face down onto the sticky side, so that will be the side that has the scoring. You should be able to feel it. You're going to flip it over, and with your heat gun on low, heat the vinyl and gently press it into the plastic. It should look like it clings onto the surface. Once it's thoroughly stuck on, you're going to repeat that on the other side. Now, in order to get this vinyl to stick, we need to make some cuts in it. So take your craft knife or your box cutter. Don't do what I'm doing here, where I'm just using a razor blade. Now we're just gonna make a cut on one side and sort of use the plastic as a guide or a ruler. And we're going to do it all the way through. And once we're on the other side, we're going to do it in reverse. So if you were looking at the heart from this way, the seams would be going away from us. So for the seam in the middle, we're going to cut it away from one side of the net, and we're going to leave about ½ an inch on the other side. Okay, so now it's time to actually turn these flat pieces of plastic into something that has dimension and form. I'm going to start by creasing the sort of radial bits, the parts that come from the center and go out towards the edge. And once I'm through there, I do the horizontal. Now, with a vinyl on it, it's going to have a bit more resistance to crease, but you don't want to apply too much force to where you break it. Now, you may have noticed that there are these diagonal lines. You don't have to score these if you don't want to. They are not necessary. Also, I think the whole thing looks nicer when it's just these squares. So if you're making this yourself, you don't have to do these diagonals. Once everything is creased, we can go ahead and start to put all the seams together. We're going to sort of put them together, apply pressure, and then we're going to fold down the bottom edge. You don't have to worry about this looking too clean. We just want the actual sort of seams that hold it together to be pretty flush. And then blast it with a little bit of heat from the heat gun. This shrinks down the vinyl so it really grips to the surface. And I do the same thing when I fold the extra over onto the other side. I'll continue this process for the rest of them until we have something that looks like this. Now, this looks pretty messy at first, but I don't recommend cutting it off just yet. It's time to put it all together. We're going to start by gluing the small hearts onto the backing. You can put these wherever you want, and for some reason, a spot has appeared on the backing and I don't know what it is. It's not glue, it's not super glue. I looked at it before, it didn't disappear, it's not water, I don't know what it is. So I'm just going to use one of these hearts to cover it up. You apply the contact cement to both sides, let it sit for a bit, and then stick it together. Now, remember that sort of overlap seam that I told you not to worry about before? Now we're going to deal with it. What I'm going to do now is take my heat gun, blast that seam with a lot of heat, and I'm going to take a razor blade or a knife, and I'm going to carefully cut away to where there's no less than about 1/8 of an inch. And now it's time to glue the shells together. So the way contact cement works is you put some down and it dries, and you put some on the other surface and it dries a bit. And when you stick those two together, it's almost like a permanent bond. So of course I apply it to both sides, and I wait a few minutes. Now this is the tricky part. We need these 2 points right here, the crest and both the actual point of the bottom of the heart, to be perfectly aligned before we can really move around anything else. So I'm going to hold it with my hands here until I feel that it's no longer slipping. And then I'm going to carefully adjust the edges onto the backing so that they follow that shape and they cover all the white parts. Once it stops sort of moving and it's gelled quite well, I'm going to set it down and let that cure. We're not going to work on the other side just yet. So wait at least a few hours. I just leave it overnight to be safe. And the following day, we are ready to do the other side. So it's just a rinse and repeat. Now, you may have noticed, well, this shape is now sort of like a bowl, and it's round, and we can't set it flat down on anything. So you can use a few cups, anything that has the same height, to hold up the edges so that you can glue this on. And I let that cure. Alright, so with the heart finished, now we need something to hold it up. Now, this heart right here isn't going to be in any sort of performance, and it doesn't need to move a whole lot. So I went ahead and modeled the stand back in Blender, and I 3D printed it out. And with that, the KS Heart replica is complete.